Welcome to Between the Details, the podcast where event planning gets real. I'm Jessica Ralph, owner of Parties a la carte.
And I'm Aaron Lockwood, owner of Lockwood Studios. Each week, we'll be sharing insider tips, honest advice, and behind-the-scenes truth for both vendors and clients.
Welcome to our next episode of Between the Details. We're so excited today to talk about destination events and what goes into having a destination event, whether that's a wedding, corporate, social. What does that look like?
Again, another topic I love.
Yes.
I've been wanting to talk about this topic because I do love traveling. So I know it can be a lot. Yeah. And I'm sure planning a destination event can be a lot too. But I think it's rewarding too. Yeah. It's fun to be able to see new places, other cultures, experience things. So what is some of the things that go into kind of behind the scenes of planning a destination event for you?
I think honestly, it's a lot of research. I think every couple or client has a vision of what that looks like and what they want, like their particulars that they want. Mm-hmm. And so then it becomes our job to figure out what venue is going to check as many boxes off as they're looking for, whether it's a wedding or a corporate client. Like our client that we did together this spring is actually moving their event to the other coast, right? And we had to look into, okay, what are all the things that they used and were really passionate about having at this event, and how do we find that somewhere else?
Gotcha.
I think even with like a wedding client, it's like, okay, we want it to be, 30 minutes from an airport. We want it to have an outdoor space. We want it to have mountain views, water views, whatever it is. We have to try to figure out the best venue that fits their criteria.
Okay. Are you involved sometimes in like a client comes to you and they're like, hey, we want to have a destination wedding. Where are some places you recommend or some countries you recommend? Or is it more so they'll come to you and they're like, we want to get married in Italy. What does that look like? Okay.
I think it's both. I mean, we get some that basically say like, hey, I want a mountain and water view, or hey, I want a tropical, wedding, or I want a snowy wedding, or I want a corporate event, for 500 on the other coast. So that it's easier, or I want something that's in the middle of all of where our clients are from, so we want something in Texas per se, or Chicago, or whatever it is. So I think we just get both aspects of it. And so we just try to find the best, options for them, and then present them like our top 3 to 5, because it's very overwhelming.
So you're really brainstorming with them through that process.
Yes.
So
a lot of questions.
Okay. And then, so let's just say it stays in the U.S. Are you also doing site visits oftentimes then for?
So, and we will essentially do a site visit if we were getting them to initially book. Mm-hmm. And then we'll usually do a re-site visit again in the planning process if it makes sense and we think we need to, depending on the scope. And then we're there on site for the event. So like we did a wedding in Arizona. I think we went 3 times. An initial visit, a visit in the middle where we did the tasting and the mock and kind of did all of those things. And then we were there on site for the wedding.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I'm assuming now these days too, like thankfully the internet, there's so much that you can research online. So if it was overseas along those lines where you couldn't necessarily do the site visits in person, I'm sure you can still find out a lot of information.
Oh, for sure. With pictures and different things. I think the biggest thing for doing a destination wedding outside of the U.S. is the insurance requirements and the travel that it takes for you to do that wedding and be gone. Like, so if I'm doing a wedding in Italy, right, I definitely have to leave much earlier and be out of the office, a few days at least beforehand. Mm-hmm. And then a few days afterwards, you have to, account for the time change. You have to account for flight delays. There's just more prep that goes in that. So I think there's also an added cost with that.
Sure.
Because we're pulling more of our time.
Yeah. And even a lot of time, not just necessarily on site, but in all that research and like making sure that if there's additional things that you have to, overcome with passports and licensing and visas or anything like that. So yeah, that's interesting. So, but I'm sure it's still fun.
Yeah, I think it's a blast. I loved it. I mean, we've done events in Arizona, Chicago, Minnesota, South Carolina, Georgia, Mexico, like everywhere. We've been in so many different places, and I love it, but it definitely does take up a significant amount of time.
Well, and I'm sure when it's like a corporate client that you've already like established a relationship with, that probably helps a little bit, kind of knowing what they want and to expect.
We already, we've already worked through their logistics from the several years before, right?
Yeah.
So we know, okay, hey, they're going to need this much space because they want this size screen, or and even if we're expanding on that, you know you're getting bigger, so you at least know the kind of the minimums, which I think is super helpful.
Yeah.
From a photography and videography standpoint, what are some extra costs that are associated for you to travel and do a destination event?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, again, the travel expenses. So like we try to keep our rate the same as if it would be local. So we're not like, charging additional rate. There's not a rate increase as far as that goes, even though, like you said, there is like oftentimes additional time out of the office. Thankfully, we can still stay pretty connected, for the most part when we travel. We did an event in Ireland last year where, with the time change, it was a little tricky. So we'd have to kind of like, we had a few calls and things that we had to do while we were gone. So we had to kind of like figure out the time differences for some of that stuff. And also, making sure that we're arriving plenty early to allow for any travel delays, things like that. Also putting in the research to make sure that if there's any licensing or additional things that we need to know, showing up into another country, especially, like that can be tricky. We had to turn down a wedding years ago that was going to be in a castle in Poland because it was like at a very historic church in Poland, and they wouldn't allow an outside photographer to come into the country and photograph in the church there. So that was kind of an interesting scenario. So it was a good thing that we found that out ahead of time rather than like showing up and then, the church being like, nope, sorry, you're not licensed to shoot in this country. So obviously if we're traveling in the US, it's, it's a lot different. But then also, I don't know if this is part of the question, but also being strategic on how we pack, like the gear that we're going to bring and making sure that we're like packing everything that we can keep with us. So that's like one thing that is kind of like a little bit scary sometimes traveling. So having, oftentimes we'll pay extra where we have like the priority boarding, so we know we can get on with our carry-on that has our camera gear. Cause I've had it happen a couple of times where they're trying to take it from us and check it in. And I'm like, you are not taking thousands of dollars of camera gear from me out of my site and checking that through on the way to an event. Yeah, especially like I couldn't ever imagine risking checking that. I mean, it's one thing if it's like tripods or light stands or, things like that where we could probably source it locally if we needed to, but I would not want to have to like try to round up cameras and cards and batteries and all that stuff. So the other thing that we take into consideration is when we're finished the event, when we're on site, we typically download everything and upload it to the cloud. So that way we have online backup of everything. So if something did happen in transit and travel, if we did lose a case or something happened, we're not going to like lose the whole
Wow, I didn't even think about that. That's so smart.
Yeah, all the footage that was what we were hired there to capture all that. So yeah, and I'm downloading it to multiple hard drives, before we head back, and all those type of things. So I think you just try to like think a worst case scenario, and then hope it never happens. But at least you're planning on it. Have a plan in place if something does go sideways. Yeah. So. It was a lot more scary back in the day of film. I did do some travel weddings back when, we were still shooting film, and they'd want to try to run it through the X-ray machines.
Oh gosh.
And so you're like panicking that they're trying to take like a wedding that we shot on film, and they sold special bags that you would put it in. They were like, lead line bags or whatever, so they could pass it safely through the X-ray machines and stuff. But now with digital, it's like so much easier. So, but I know there are like some of my photographer friends still shoot film. So I'm sure they probably take that into consideration if they're traveling.
Yeah.
So how about for you, as far as like when you're planning a destination event or wedding, how much does the destination influence like the decor, the floral, the design, like that type of thing?
Amount. I think honestly, you don't want to fight where you are, right? And I would say that here or destination. So if you're having your ceremony on a beach, I'm not saying you need to be beachy, but you need to not fight it. You need to make it natural and organic, or whatever the vibe you're going for is. But I wouldn't fight the space. I think you need to try to lean into wherever you are, especially a destination wedding, just because like you've went to this island for this vibe, or you've went to this snowy cliff, or whatever it is. Like, so don't fight don't fight it. Just roll with it, because in the end, it'll save you money.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you're taking that into consideration when you're helping your clients pick where the destination would be.
Sure.
So if they're like, I hate the sand, I hate the beach, then you're not going to be like, get married in Tahiti or
like I would never, like personally, I would never do a sand event, right? Like I wouldn't do toes in the sand.
Yeah.
But if that's what they want, then I'm going to be like, okay, let's evaluate it and make sure it is what you want, and then how do we get it?
That's cool. So I guess also too, like probably thinking about maybe not so much in the U.S., but like you said, you've done weddings in Italy and other things. So I think it's probably cool where you can incorporate some of the local culture and local cuisine and, some of those things.
I think anywhere. I mean, even when we were in Arizona, right? Like we did prickly pear margaritas, right?
Oh, that's cool.
And like we did fun stuff like that. So we do try to, I can't remember what we did in South Carolina. It was like a pie or something that was like really popular at this particular, Montage Pimento Bluff or whatever it was. I can't remember. It was like they did all these like pies. And so we try to really incorporate something that's local. And even activity wise, like when we did the Dove Mountain one, we did hikes and we got to see I'm going to mess it up, but the javelinas or whatever they're called, So we really try to incorporate all of those components into the thing, because you're there. You need to make, like your guests are there. You need to make sure that they're like taking in the scenery and the culture or the activities or what the space is known for.
That's really cool. Yeah, because I'm sure like almost every place has something that's like unique to them, where it's whether it's cuisine or a cocktail or the sites or tours that you could do or like that kind of thing.
Yeah, there was even like a ranch down the road that lots of movies had been filmed on, and so we did a tour of that. Our clients, we actually went early to do some team building, and our clients joined us, and we all did a big hike together and like got to learn about all the different cacti and, like how, what the different plants and flowers were and what, that you could eat and not eat. And
that's fascinating.
how long it takes for a cactus arm to grow on it. It's like, I want to say it's like 100 years before it even starts.
Wow.
I could be wrong. Don't fact check me on that one. But I want to say it was like 100 years, 90 years, something like crazy for the cactus to get that extra little arm.
That's really cool. I think to me, that's the thing that makes the extra work of destination events, whether it's like corporate or wedding or whatever, but to be able to go and experience some of those things and be part of it. And, a lot of times for us, like we're documenting those things for the client. So, if we're going along on some of those like pre-sightseeing things that they're doing, or like, Jen and I had the opportunity to go and do video at an event in Ireland last year with my friend Alex. And so we split up and like we got to go on like the castle tours and, see like the historic, and there's just so much history over there. Like, townhouses that are like 1,000 years old, or like city that is like, or whatever. So it's like, experience things that we don't really get to see here. So
I think they're great and I love doing them. I think for us, we do so many events locally that it's difficult to do too many of them outside of the area, because it does take you out of the office. So we are very mindful of that. And I think if we only did destination, we would reduce the amount of events that we took on per year, because you do need to allocate a lot more time. I think a lot of planners that are doing a lot of weddings overseas are maybe tops doing, 12 to 15 events a year. So I think you just have to really kind of balance that out. I like a handful a year just for fun and creativity and like getting to experience a new place and broadening our horizons and our creativity and like getting to see
travel is like incredible for that.
But I think it comes with a cost of your time and how much time you have to prep and be there for.
For sure. So there's a balance of how much you could take on and do, because I'm sure it's fun for your team to be able to come along and do some of those things and like the camaraderie and the fun of traveling. But at the same time, it could, if you did too many, it could become a lot, like that much time away from home and everything you have going on here. So,
yeah. I think like we have a wedding in the Keys coming up, and even though that's in Florida, it's still, a good distance away.
Yeah.
We're looking at doing a wedding in Tennessee, at a really cool venue. And I think it just it sparks different creativity. There the leaves are changing and it's just a different scenery.
Yeah, that's really fun.
For you, how do you decide when you're doing a destination event whether you're going to bring crew from here or hire crew there?
That's that's good because, obviously it's nice to I have like colleagues that we collaborate together and we have really good relationships. So that camaraderie to be able to travel together and, work together is really fun. But sometimes it's also nice to be able to like source some people locally that know the area, and like also it's like less expensive because we're not paying for their travel and accommodations and all that.
So it's a combo.
So I guess it would kind of depend on how big of a crew that we were like planning on bringing along, because obviously pretty much every time that we have a travel job, like Jen and I both go, because even if she's not necessarily needed on the shoot, it's way more fun to travel together and to do that. But a lot of times we're
backup.
For sure. And a lot of times we're tag teaming photo and video. So I'm covering photo, or I'm covering video, maybe a little bit of photo, she's doing photo. So then it kind of works out well. And also the fact that we can travel as a couple kind of cuts back on the cost a little bit too, because they're not having to pay for like 2 hotel rooms or like, but even some of my friends that I travel with, like we're not opposed to having to share as long as we have 2 queen size beds, we're okay. Don't put us in 1 king size. It might be a little awkward, but no. So I guess it would it would depend on where it is. And
how far in advance do you travel typically when you're doing a destination?
I definitely like to be there like early the day before, if not like one more.
I like a night, at least a night in between.
Yeah.
But I like 2 if I can. Just I like to take if the wedding is on a Saturday, depending on if I have a Friday event or not, I definitely want to be there Thursday, leave Thursday night, so that I have all day Friday to acclimate, get whatever we need for the team, get any packages, like just give ourselves a day to like regroup.
Yeah, and that gives us time to like scout too. So like when we were doing a lot of travel weddings, we would usually include the rehearsal dinner as like part of the coverage. We wouldn't charge additional for that, but it gave us an opportunity, because sometimes like the family we hadn't met before, if it was like where, they lived or whatever, it would give us a chance to scout the venues, to be kind of part of some of the additional activities. Same if it's like a corporate event, like gives us time to like load in and, make sure we're like familiar with all the logistics. If we're traveling outside of the region where we're going to be, I would rather leave immediately after the event if there's a time constraint to get back, but get there several days early.
Yeah, me too.
I would not want to arrive like on the same day that the event started.
I won't do it.
Yeah, that would be really stressful.
Flight issues.
For sure.
Yeah.
But and a lot of times too, because Jen and I enjoy traveling anyways, so we try to like kind of buffer it on both ends if we're able to, especially if it's somewhere like we haven't been previously, and we'll spend a couple extra days there. So that's always kind of nice. Like we can get in a little work vacation away from it. So that works out nicely too, especially if we're going overseas. Like when we went last year, we took an extra week and went and visited her cousin in Italy, and
nice.
kind of made it.
That.
Yeah. So that's fun. But I definitely like, if I can take any stress out of the equation, I want to leave like plenty of travel time. Again, if like a case didn't show up or I had to source some extra gear or something like that.
I mean, even when I went to a conference last year in Italy and I was just trying to find a little battery, I bought this really cool camera. It's like a G7X or something that everybody was raving about. And Jim left the battery back. And I had to go to like
trying
20,
to find where you could charge it.
20, no charging it. I needed the whole battery. I think I had to go to like 20 stores before I found it. So and that was like for a regular digital camera. Like I can't imagine like trying to find, a camera that, was like specific.
Wow. Yeah.
Like, that this was just like a little Canon camera.
Yeah.
It was like 20 stores later.
Well, and I'm sure that you're also having to figure out the logistics of like sourcing stuff locally versus shipping things or whatever. So like, how does that look
We source primarily locally, and then whatever we're not sourcing locally, we traditionally try to bring in our luggage.
Okay.
So that it's with us and we know. Or we'll direct ship to a hotel. It really depends on the location. But I try to use local vendors wherever we are because I think they know they know the space, so that and I think we help them because we're not from the area. I think we help them essentially think outside the box because we're new to the space, but they help us understand the logistics that are, maybe challenging or that we don't know yet, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, it's a kind of a great, mashup because we're coming with new, fresh ideas, and they're telling us like, okay, this is why this will work, and this is why this might not work. And so I think it's a great component.
Yeah. I think that's got to be a big benefit to your client too, because I would imagine most of the destination stuff that you do is with a local client. So
No.
Really?
I would say majority of time we're taking them to somewhere they don't live.
Okay.
So like
But that's what I'm saying. Like say they live here in Florida.
Oh yeah, they live here in
Florida. And then they're getting married in Italy,
Well,
or they're getting married in Colorado.
Like even when I did the Arizona wedding, like I did the sister's wedding here, which is how they met me.
Okay.
But then the other sister lived in California.
Oh, wow.
The mom lived up north.
Okay.
And the groom's family was from outside of Arizona. So they were familiar with it, but but nobody really lived in the area.
But they had a working relationship with you prior.
They had a working.
Okay.
And then my North Carolina wedding, they had booked a wedding locally, which is how they started with us. But then they weren't happy with the logistics of the venue, and so they decided to move spaces.
Oh, wow.
And so then they were like, hey, can we go here? And we're like, yes.
Okay.
And then sometimes like we did a wedding and then they want us to do the bridal shower in Michigan for them. Like, so, and that was just because again, they knew us and liked us. So, but I would say 50% of our couples that come here for a wedding don't live here.
Right.
They visited here as a child, or, there's some connection, but they're not as familiar.
Yeah.
So they like working with us because we are here.
Yeah, that makes sense because the area local. I was just kind of assuming that the reason like a lot of times people would take you to a destination is because they were able to find you here where they live. So that makes it easier for them for the meetings and the planning and all that. And then you guys are going traveling to that's interesting.
It's a mix because even my clients that find us here, like I said, 50% of them don't live here. We're doing Zooms.
Yeah. That's true anymore. It almost doesn't really. It's such a small world now with travel, and like it's gotten so much easier.
Or for micro weddings and elopements, those are like kind of getting super popular. Do you think couples are using destinations as a way to like force a micro wedding almost?
And again, we saw that a ton where it was like if they had the wedding locally, they were probably looking at like 300 to 500 people in attendance, whereas they're like, hey, we're going to go get married, in Italy. And then we're going to have 50 of our, closest friends and family. So not necessarily like they're looking to cut back on what they're spending, but maybe keep it more intimate and more,
I think, or higher
personal
level. Yeah. Like they want it to be more of an experience for people.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's a certain place that's underrated for weddings and events?
I mean, I think people would be pleasantly surprised. Or you mean locally, or you just mean like in general?
In general, like is there some place that you would say like people should go look there? And I'm surprised they don't.
I don't. I think people would be surprised at the Longboat Key for us local, like especially the new St. Regis.
Yeah,
there
it's beautiful.
Is like incredible.
Yeah, I have my first wedding there next.
Yeah, and it's one of the most high end venues in the U.S. right now. And like it's right in our backyard.
Yeah.
So I think that is really cool. And then I think too that I think people don't realize that there's so many places that you can travel that are really beautiful, but they're not like crazy expensive.
Yeah, I think like Scotland and Ireland are really trending right now.
I was shocked at how inexpensive it was to fly into Dublin.
I think people are really looking at this and saying, gosh, like let's go there. I think it's the new Italy.
It was cheaper for us to fly to Dublin than it would have been to fly to California at the time.
But you know what they say all the time too? Like, so, you know, our family is like a big skiing family. And they say it's actually less expensive to go ski somewhere else because of the cost over there than it is to try to ski here for 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, I've seen the breakdown of all that. So I think that would be shocking for people to realize that they could go like to the Alps or somewhere in Europe or there's places in like France and Italy and stuff where like, you know, by the time you add it all up, because like the lift passes are so inexpensive compared to like Breckenridge or Vail or like those places that are like gotten really busy and like the lodging out there is crazy expensive.
It's like so expensive to go skiing there anymore. Yeah. It's almost
you can drop $10,000 for a family to go like
you can drop
without
way
even
more
blinking an eye.
Yeah, I mean,
like for probably like 2 people, you can
lodging is crazy. But we're getting off topic.
But I think it's still like a destination because you could go to those same areas and have a wedding. And incorporate some.
I'd love to do a snowy wedding.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Or incorporate like imagine even just going to like the Alps in the summertime and having a wedding there or somewhere like those areas. So yeah, I think people would be surprised that it's like not that much more expensive sometimes to travel outside of the country. But I mean, you just got to make sure you're prepared with passports and time and all those things. So, okay. So to you, does that like add to the value of doing a destination wedding that you can go somewhere like that?
I mean, I think it's for me, it's like great if I can, and it's fun and it's fun for the team. It's not. I'm working.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like, and I've got to get back. It's like, so for me, I think it's great and I love it. I'm happy to do it. I like it from a creative standpoint, but it's not. I'm not going to lower my rates to go do it somewhere else.
Yeah.
It actually takes more time.
Right. Yeah.
But I love it, and I love what makes the client or the couple happy, right? Like, so if you want to have your wedding there and that's going to make you thrilled, I am happy to execute it. But it's not like
that was going to be my side question is, do you feel like it adds like just a more sense of like specialness to it for the client, like where they're all traveling together, there's like a little bit more
I think it depends on the
together. Family. Okay.
Depends on the family. I think you can have a lot of events, but I also think it adds to the cost.
True.
So like, if you're having a welcome party, and I also think it makes you feel like you need to entertain them more because now you really have taken them out of their area, right? So now you need a welcome party.
They're your responsibility for the entire,
So I think it's actually more costly, which is why I think they're micro weddings, right? Because you're really paying for all of these other components.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. So you definitely really have to value the time that you're going to spend. And I'm sure for some of them too, they probably have to contribute to some of the travel costs for some of their guests and other things.
I think that's also part of it too. I think when a couple comes to me and they says, okay, hey, I want to have a destination wedding and the cost is a factor, I think we look at that a little bit and say like, okay, are your guests going to be able to afford to get here? Number one. And if they're not, does that need to go into this budget? Because you're going to be like, to not have them be a part of this wedding is a no-go for you. So I think we have to kind of look at that. And I always say to them like, okay, who are your must-have people? Like who no matter what, you need to be here, and what do you think that they could afford to travel and to come to this wedding? And do you want that to be what factors your destination and your venue, or are you willing to subsidize the cost for them?
I mean, I guess I see that even with things taking place here locally, where oftentimes the families are flying people in from all over the world to attend, especially if it's a wedding. Corporate stuff, like it's even probably more
like you're seeing
stateside, but
well, I mean, I think
that's true because
these days you've got so many people working remote. Like I feel like you are flying in people from all over the place for any type of event these days, and I do think a lot of people are considering that part of the cost of the event.
Yeah, we just had that recently where they had teams like all over the place. So people were coming from all over Europe and, so then they even try to like figure that out. Like what's the most central country, not necessarily like where's the most, the easiest place in the US, but what's the most central country that we can bring everybody to.
Yeah, I agree.
So That's interesting.
Okay. Well,
So-
this was a good topic.
Yeah, there's just
You've been dying to do it. You got
I know,
your wish.
I love it. I think it just is like, I don't know. It's just a stage for us right now too that we just
that's
love
because
traveling.
everybody's
and, like,
left the nest,
they
basically.
can leave the boys behind. They don't need us to like be there to make sure they don't burn the house down. Or
I'm trying to savor every moment. I've only got one year left with James in the house, really, like before he's like graduated. So I'm trying to just like take that in. But I can see that after that, it's like, all right, let's go.
Well, that's where we're kind of like planning for this stuff because it's the same for us with Evan. It's his last year of high school, but we're trying to plant those seeds for like when he's off to college, then we're ready to boogie.
Yeah, I still have the dogs.
They become part of the family.
They do.
Yeah,
So
but you got to have the boys take care of them.
That's
then
right.
while you're
I'm like, hey, live at the house for a week for free and eat all of our
all
food.
you have to do is take care of feed the dogs, make sure that they're still like alive when we get back. So.
Lord help me.
Awesome. Well, that's good.
Good episode.
I love it. Perfect.
Thank you.